This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Good to see Kevin again. We're interviewing Kevin McAleer on great literature or literature that might not be so great, depending on what it is. We do this weekly as part of a YouTube channel I call Timothy's Academy. Kevin's my brother, but he's also a published author many times over, so it's interesting to get his thoughts on much of the literature out there. And we started with his own books. You can get that video on my YouTube channel. Then we did a session of Hemingway. And this is our third session of Jack London. Our first session, we did some of his key novels. Our second session last week, we just covered many of his short stories, and a lot of them being an initial collection of short stories by London called The Son of the Wolf. And we decided that there's so much substance to these stories and so much interest in them, we might as well focus on another short story collection, his second one. It's called The God of His Fathers. And there were, I think, 9 short stories in Son of the Wolf, and I believe there are 11 short stories in The God of Our Fathers. He has 2 other short story collections on the Klondike that we may or may not get into, depending on how today goes. But before we dive into each story individually, I'd like to ask Kevin what he thought of the overall collection of The Son of His Fathers.
I thought he suffered the sophomore curse. I thought that this anthology was not as good as the first. Maybe because it seemed like there was a bit of repetition involved. No, only a bit, but it just had to do with me, the reader, and having come fresh from that first collection, The Son of the Wolf, and then just the very next day, starting in on the God of His Fathers. That wasn't how the books came out. They came out a year apart at least. Son of the Wolf in 1900 and The God of His Fathers in 1901. So it has to do with me. I'm sure that people, if they loved Jack London in that first anthology, they would have just been licking their chops for the next one, and they couldn't get enough of all the stuff that I say was kind of a repetition. So even as I'm leveling this critique, I think you can just discount it. It just goes to say that he's just dealing with similar themes. He doesn't go beyond anything. It's the Klondike that he's mining here, and all to the good. I say the sophomore curse, but he was starting at a very high summit there, in my view, at 24. Oh man, I just keep emphasizing that age thing, because it's not only the facility of expression that is amazing, which again I think I mentioned in the last video James Joyce had. Many of the stories that went into the Dubliners finally, it wasn't published when he was 24, but had been written or published by the time he was 24. It's not just the beauty of expression, the real poetry, I would argue, that Jack London brings to bear in certain passages. It can bring tears to your eyes if you're in a certain mood. But the experience this man has assembled to know these eternal truths, I would argue. Some of us go to our graves not knowing half the stuff that he seems to know. And why do I say they're truths? Because they just resonate as that. Me at 62, it's like, yeah, right. That's how I see things. But he was saying these things at 24, and the second volume at 25. It's very Hemingway-esque, although Hemingway didn't have near the breadth of experience that London did.
I would also add that with my research on London, I believe he only was in the Klondike for 6 months, if I'm not mistaken, which means in 6 months he really got a wealth of info and stories and experiences.
Right. I think that's in fact what Hemingway himself said, and he was Exhibit A, that Hemingway himself, that what sometimes separates the men from the boys in terms of authors is that they just have a great ability to assimilate experience and process it for their art than we mere mortals. They just have an ability to just take it on quick and then bring it out in an artistic fashion. And I think London definitely had that. Every time you hear about people talking about him, they say he was like one of these very vitalistic creatures, completely alive. He just electricity came off him. Yeah.
Okay.
Men and
Well,
women.
yeah. So in other words, he was an author who lived his experiences that he wrote about. He
lived enough of them to know how to extrapolate from them, and he had a great imagination, and then he just took the ball and ran with it. Yeah, he had all those factors. I mean, he was a talent. I mean, he worked like the devil, as we know from Martin Eden, because that was very autobiographical, but he had great talent to work with.
Okay, very good. So do you want to go through these one by one now, and I'll name the story and you tell me your thoughts on it?
How about if we go back and forth on this? Because I don't know about our audience, but I'm as interested in your opinions of these stories as I am in mine. Actually, more interested in yours. I've sort of formed mine from years back.
Okay.
It comes these things rather fresh. Why don't we do this? Why don't we have like one of us give a short summary for the people listening, like very short, and then the other guy will take it up from there and say what he thinks about it.
Well, you did such a good job of covering all the stories of Son of the Wolf. I expected you would be doing the same with God of His Father.
Then fine. I was going to pass on some of the work to you.
And the only reason I say that is because, another reason for saying it is I read these stories 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I've read about 30 more since. So
you have? Wow.
I'm reading. Wait, how many more since? 1, 2, probably about. I've read about 20 to 25 more since then. So I might get them jumbled up in my mind.
Yeah. Well, as I say, yeah, there's overlap in many of them, and that's easy. Yeah. No,
so I'd rather you, since you've been fresher with the stories, you start and then I'll add.
Got it.
Okay, cool.
Well, the title piece, the son of
the God of his fathers.
Excuse me, the son of the wolf, the God of his fathers. That he has children of the frost. I mean, the faith of men. He's using a lot of what do you call them?
Relationships. The son,
yeah,
the father, the children,
fathers and sons and children and men, and of course. And then women.
So that even the titles of the stories are so generic.
The grit of women, which we'll come to, is a title. Yeah. So the God of his fathers. You sent me an email. I think it was Monday or Tuesday, where you said I've read the first 3, and they're excellent.
Excellent quality, I said.
Excellent quality. Yeah. I agree with you in terms of the God of his fathers. I thought that was excellent. I'd completely forgotten that story. I'd read it before. It came back to me. It's like, oh yeah, I know this. I'd completely forgotten it, and it's a completely original story. I don't think how could anyone dream this thing up, right? For one thing, it seems rather improbable. What am I talking about? There's a. We should get our protagonists' names, right? Shouldn't we? Although
no problem, we have time.
Yeah.
Let me.
There's a fellow named Hayes Stockard. Hayes Stockard, and he is. We open the story with Hayes Stockard. He's chatting with this fellow, who seems to be a half breed, or another term that London uses is half caste.
Here he is
in your version.
It says, "Hey." It has his
my
name.
Version too.
Okay, we both got the same version.
That must be the guy. Yeah.
Yeah. It says it right there, Hayes Stockard.
I think these are the original illustrations to the original volumes. And he's speaking to this fellow who is a half caste. And what's his name? He seems like he's half French voyageur or something. And but let me find it. We got to get the name straight. I'm sorry, audience.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Hey, Stalker.
Baptiste the Red. Okay, so we have Hay Stockard, and he's speaking with Baptiste the Red. And Baptiste the Red has had a bad experience with the Catholic Church. He's had several bad experiences. We won't go into them, but he detests the Catholic Church. And I think, as I say, I believe he's half Indian, half white. And at a certain point, he's gone back to the Indians. And he wants nothing to do with white man's religion. And he's speaking to this Hay Stockard, and he's saying, he tells him all about his past history with the church and why he is not a fan. And then he tells Hay Stockard, well, I hope you're going to be on your way pretty soon, because every time a white man comes into the neighborhood, some guy with a cross is coming in trying to convert us. And we don't want that. Well, what do you know? Next little chapter that divide up into small little chapters. Some man of the church comes in a canoe with in the center of it an Indian fore and an Indian aft paddling the canoe, and they come up and he does a benediction as soon as he hits the shore and gives thanks, and the Indians are his acolytes and they follow suit. And Baptiste Red says, not good. And he says, look, boys, you're going to have to skedaddle on out of here, because we don't want any of this. And then he goes, hey, Stockard. Hey, Stockard. Why don't you get this guy out of here? And Hay Stockard says, I can't. I think he wintered in a cabin with him or something. He said, I can't. I promised him. I guess they had to meet. They were going to rendezvous there or something. I don't know exactly what his promise was, but he felt obligated to this fellow, not because he was a religious man himself. In fact, Hay Stockard, the religious fellow, his name is, what is his name? The religious fellow's name is Sturgis Owen. Sturgis Owen. And I think Sturgis Owen calls him a blasphemer. And anyway, this Hay Stockard is not at all religious either, right? He's more on the side of Baptiste Red than he is on the side of Sturgis Owen. But because of his, it would seem, as London describes it, his racial loyalty, London does a lot of this, his racial loyalty to his fellow white man, he's going to not send him on his way. He's going to, if Baptiste Red wants to make trouble, then they'll stand together and fight him. And that's basically how it breaks down. They have a big fight. And Sturgis Owen, he invokes God, and he's scared, as anyone would be, with all these Indians attacking, led by this Baptiste Red. And I think they're in the hundreds, about 100 of them. They're sure to be wiped out. But this Hay Stockard is a, you can tell that London really admires him. Here's a real man, right? He doesn't believe in God or anything. He doesn't even like this fellow, this religious guy. But we're not going to be pushed around by some half-breed and a bunch of you Redskins, basically, right? That's what he said. And they fight it out, and Hay Stockard's wife, who is an Indian, gets a spear straight in the chest right off the bat. He's got a young child. Indian picks him up, throws him against a tree, something. It's a slaughter. Except Hay Stockard, he's tough, he's brave, he's a good fighter, and he stands up to these guys. I don't know what happens to the other Indians, but the two Indians that accompanied the religious fellow. But then you have, at the end, it's sort of like a standoff, and they're all kind of like huffing and puffing, waiting for the final rush. And then Baptiste Red says to Hay Stockard, so now are you willing to reject God, because implicitly he's not, by saying, I'm going to be on my way and we're going to, do as you bid because you don't want any white man's God in your midst. And he says, no, I'm not. And the Sturgis Owen says, it's not exactly like he says, no, I don't believe it. But there's like a little exchange where the half-breed, as London puts it, says to Sturgis Owen, where now is thy God? The half-breed demanded. And Sturgis Owen says, I do not know, because he's petrified. He's going to die, I do not know. He stood straight and rigid like a child repeating a catechism. Hast thou then a God at all? Says Baptiste Red. I had, says Sturgis Owen. And now, says Baptiste Red. No, says Sturgis Owen. Hay Stockard swept the blood from his eyes and laughed. So you got London setting this this curious constellation of personalities and belief systems and ethnicities. And I thought it was improbable, the whole thing very improbable, but powerful, very powerful. And so basically the end is that the Sturgis Owen just goes away. He's alive. He's intact. He has, he's an apostate, obviously. By his standards, he's an apostate. He didn't die a martyr's death. But this blasphemer, Stockard, he dies the martyr's death. Great irony involved in it. I loved it. I thought it was great.
Well, there's a lot of irony in London, is there not?
Yes.
And there's so much irony that I was thinking of another author who was contemporary to him named Thomas Mann, who we both know well.
Yeah.
You told me that Thomas Mann is one of the few German authors you enjoy reading in German. Is that not correct?
That's right. He writes a beautiful, clear, and pristine German. And
I was thinking that he was pretty much an exact contemporary of London. And he is known as the ironic German, they call him, because so many of his tales are fraught with irony. And I was thinking that London could be called the ironic American, because there is so much irony throughout all his oeuvre. Is that not true, Kevin?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
From start to finish. And it's not something that you mention when you think of London. I don't think I mentioned it once in our past 2 hours, but you're right. He's a very ironic author. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
I like irony in my authors. Don't lay it on too thick. Don't let it bleed into sarcasm. But
yeah,
there's no danger of that with London because sincerity is his middle name. I mean, it just oozes sincerity, all his stuff. Like he believes, what he's writing.
Right.
But I love irony because it keeps it defeats the cliche and it keeps you a little bit off balance.
Like when I see a story by London called something like The Law of Life, I'm assuming there's going to be some kind of death in there. Like he
means death. That's the law of life.
But what was that?
Yeah. That's exactly what it means. It means death. When he says the law of life, that's what the law of life is, that we all must die.
That's right. So, but instead of saying the law of death, he'll put it in the ironic sense so that the reader eventually discovers it for him or herself.
Right.
Very good. Okay, so nice intro to this collection. What about the second story, The Great Interrogation?
I love that story. Well, this is very quickly done. And it seems to be a theme running throughout London. It's men alone. Well, take a heavyweight title, Men Without Women, up in the Klondike, right? I mean, we're all men, you want female companionship. And when you're thrown into this situation with a bunch of dudes, you get lonely. So the question was, where are you going to find a wife? And this is a theme of a number of stories across these 4 collections.
Right.
And I love how he does this one, because it's about a guy. We don't know his history or anything, because originally we see it's the woman who comes from stage right. She comes down the river. She's got some French guy, some French Canadian guy. And by the way, London's very good with dialects. You read it, it's like, you hear it in your inner ear. It's like, yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. Especially in Batar.
With Black Leclerc.
Black Leclerc. I mean, that guy's great. I mean, I think that came in his fourth anthology. I think he really mastered the technique at that point with Black Leclerc.
That's the high point of his dialect.
Yeah. But he was warming up with these French Canadians here in this story, and she's really rich. She's sitting in the middle of this, like, I think it's a raft or something, and they're pulling her down some rivers, the Yukon. I don't know, and she's in the middle of this thing, in a nest of furs. So a rich woman, what's she doing here, right? Well, what she's doing is she's going in search of her lost love. Some man, it turns out later, we hear this later on, some man that she rejected many years ago for an older, wealthier man. She'd chosen to be a bird in a gilded cage, as opposed to marrying, her heart's desire. So she had basically, she dumped this guy, married this other fellow. He died at some point. In the meantime, her jilted lover has, gone up, maybe to forget, gone up to the Klondike. And in the meantime, he's married an Indian woman. Okay. Now she's coming back to reclaim him, to throw herself at his feet. Actually, I think she more or less does that, and says, "I'm pitifully sorry. It was a mistake. I love you still to this day. And do you love me?" And he says, "Yes, I do." And this whole time they're having this conversation. Okay, he's totally surprised by this. It's like, she can't call up with her smartphone and say, "Hey, by the way, I'm on my way." I don't think they had they didn't have anything. They had nothing there. You didn't even have a telegraph out there. You had nothing.
Absolute wilderness.
Absolute wilderness. So he's living this absolute wilderness, and he's really roughing it with this Indian woman. I don't know if they're married or if they're just common law or whatever. But she's as good as his life companion at this point. And this whole time that they're having this discussion about, wait, won't you come back with me? And, I love you so. And look at, I have so much, she'd inherited all this wealth from this older guy who died. Right. We can have a lovely life together. And the narrator, which is not the guy in the story, but the narrator describes her as being, a very comely woman still, nice to look at, someone who's not just wealthy. She's got other things to offer. And the whole time, this Indian woman's working. She's moving in and out of the cabin. She's drawing water from the river. She's feeding the dogs. She's giving them a whack when they get out of hand. And that's like the contrast that London sets up so beautifully. You have, obviously a tough woman. She's going out into the Klondike to get her man. I mean, she's got some moxie, right? But she's a pampered, ex-bird in a gilded cage, and now we have this real tough, of the soil Indian woman who is, she's used to this life. She's been through they've been through a number of experiences together, this fellow and the Indian woman. Anyway, the whole time this is going on, you as the reader, at least I as the reader, without even knowing their past history, because that comes into the narrative about what their past history was like, she reminds him of it, and we're informed of it that way. Almost from the first, as it becomes clear what her mission is, you're telling this guy, don't do it. No, don't you dare. Don't you leave this Indian woman. You want to stick it out with her. This woman She betrayed you once. She may do it again. She swears up and down she won't, but it doesn't even matter if she betrayed you. This is your woman now. She seems like a good woman. She goes through thick and thin with you. And then at the end, it finally works out that way. He says, you know, he falters. You know, you think he might go. He might do it. And London's good enough that it's like not like you just think it's a authorial technique. Like he's just throwing it in there. You think, oh, well, he might, you know, because London has tragic endings, you know, and that would be the tragic ending. Now he leaves the woman. It's like, gee, are you kidding me? You did it. Oh, but the whole time your heart is with the Indian woman. Your heart is with her, and finally, it breaks down that way. He says, no, I'm sorry. You'll have to go. Indian woman comes down after the woman goes down to the raft, and she says, you know, you make my man unhappy. He's lying on bunk and he's staring into the air. You make him unhappy. You go, you bad woman, right? She's speaking her pidgin English. And then at a certain point, the Indian woman puts her hand up and strokes her cheek, and then they embrace. And then you see that this white woman, this American woman, she has a certain pride and dignity, and she goes off with dignity and
she says and she finally concedes her defeat by telling the Indian woman, "Be good to him," she cried, "Be good to him."
Right.
Which is very poignant.
It's a very touching story. I'm getting shivers up my spine as I relate it.
Yeah, and the title.
I think it's masterful.
Well, and the title, "The Great Interrogation." What is that? What does that refer to exactly? I think everybody around the Klondike is asking, what is this woman here for? Who is she here for? I think that's what I recall as the Great Interrogation. Right. Who is this woman? Why is she here? Who is she looking for? You know, I want to be the guy. I wish. Right. We don't know.
I mean, it's a very simple plot, but he sets it up in such a piece by piece revelatory way that it comes across as more complex than it is.
Right.
Okay, she wants this guy. He's going to come. You're going to leave your wife? No. Your Indian wife? No. And she doesn't. And that's it. You know. But it's a masterful story. I wish I had written it. My highest compliment.
Very good. Very good. Okay. Next story. Yeah. Which make men remember.
Okay, I'll just tell you off the bat. I didn't much care for this story.
Right.
I thought it was sort of contrived.
Okay.
It's about a guy who kills a guy. You know, what do you do in the Klondike at night? You go out drinking and gambling, right? I guess they had prostitutes there too. But
I have a note here that it's another dueling story about a duel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And you're the master of the dueling history, my friend. For the viewers who hadn't listened to the first video, Kevin here has written. He wrote his doctoral dissertation on the tradition of pistol dueling in Germany during the Wilhelmine era, circa 1871 to the beginning of World War I. And his dissertation on the duel was turned into a book by Princeton University Press. So Kevin, you know a lot about the duel, and this is there's a few dueling stories in London. How does he handle the duel in this one? If you recall?
Oh, I guess he does it okay. He does it okay, but he doesn't know. It has nothing in common with the Continental Duel. Yeah, I just want to let the readers know, or the readers, let the listeners know. It's basically about a guy who kills a fellow in a casino, and he takes off. I guess no one can catch him. He's in the snow in his moccasins. Okay, whatever. They can't catch him. And he shakes off the dogs. He shakes off the law. He shakes off the guy who he's killed's friends, except for one person. One guy keeps after him and finally catches up with him. He says, "Hey, look, I'm your friend. I want to hide you." He does. He hides him successfully in his cabin until things cool down. A couple months, I guess. And then he says, "Okay, we're ready to go. We can take off." I don't know what the plan is exactly, but they're gonna take off together. And then at a certain point on the trail, this fellow who had taken the killer in, he says, "You know, that was my best friend you killed, and now we're gonna let God decide this, or fate, whatever the thing was." And they have
an interesting. The question is, why does this guy take in this guy who's on the run? and treat him so well and agree to hide him from the law until things, boil over or smooth over. And at the end, he demands God to decide who's going to come out the winner in a dueling situation. I thought it was an interesting plot point there, why this guy would take him in. And we find out at the end it's to have this duel.
Yeah. I don't know why you had to have a duel. It's like 50 paces. That's a long ways away. I mean, it's hard to hit someone. But apparently the guy whose friend died, he kills the killer, apparently, and that's basically it. I thought it was contrived. I didn't think someone would do that.
Okay, someone wouldn't take in this man who's
well,
running from the law for murder.
Well, for one thing, the chase was unreal. I mean, he's going to shake off all the dogs and everyone else in the town, but this one guy's going to catch up with him, and then he's going to pull the wool over his eyes, and this guy's not going to be suspicious. He's very sad.
What about the title, Which Make Men Remember? What does that refer to? Do you recall?
I don't know. The fun thing about London's titles is sometimes they often don't have anything directly to do.
That's right.
With the story, like the last one you decided, in the beginning, but then the title loses all meaning after you're like 2 pages into the story. The Great Interrogation.
Right.
Loses all meaning. And then this one too, I don't know. Well, so your argument for it is that it's sort of Poe-esque, is what you're saying. You like Edgar Allan Poe so much. And sometimes people accuse Poe of being a little bit artificial, but I like him almost for that reason. The Mask of the Red Death, and then at midnight it struck, and then this guy in the rope. But he's in another genre. London's supposed to be a realist. He's supposed to be a naturalist. And when he does this kind of thing, it's like, I don't quite buy it. That's my objection to it.
Well, here, and it does have a very strong religious element. I'll read just a brief paragraph. I have had faith in God all the days of my life. I believe he loves justice. I believe he is looking down upon us now, choosing between us. I believe he waits to work his will through my own right arm, and such is my belief that we will take equal chance and let him speak his own judgment.
Yeah.
So, very Middle Ages kind of belief in God choosing the righteous one by means of a duel.
Yeah. Like I say, just didn't do it for me. Sorry, Jack.
And by the way, you say I love Poe so much. Well, I quote Poe quite a bit because he is significant. I don't know if I love Poe. I like him a lot, though.
Well, I love Poe in certain of his incarnations.
We're gonna have to give a whole session just to Poe, if you don't
Poe,
mind.
yeah. Poe's the guy that people love to ignore because they think he's just horror stories.
Really?
He's not at all.
You mean in academia?
I don't know academia. I think academia has started to take him seriously recently, but
okay.
But I just think that people in general, it's like he's a fun author. You can't take him too seriously.
Right. He's a lot of fun. But you did mention last week that the French really liked him because of Baudelaire's translations of his works, which were quite poetic in and of themselves. Apparently.
Yeah. Of course, everyone. You read the Raven in high school, and that's he's really a multitasker, Mr. Poe. I mean
first mystery,
first-rate poetry, first-rate short stories, and a great essayist and critic, as you also know.
Okay, Kev. So the fourth story in God of Our Fathers is called Siwash. Siwash, Siwash, in reference to a certain Indian tribe and a certain Indian woman, if I recall the story properly.
Mm-hmm.
You have any thoughts on Siwash?
Yeah. I guess I think I'm describing things a bit too much, but I describe my 2 favorite stories pretty much, and right at the top.
We could go quickly through the rest.
Yeah, we'll go quickly through the rest. It's the contrast between the thing is that London's always dealing with the racial and blood issue. He's really, you can tell he's like working this out in his mind. He's trying to figure things out. He's trying to balance Darwin against Spencer, against Marx.
And against Nietzsche.
And against Nietzsche, he's trying to figure this out. He's no matter what a great talent he was as a writer, his intellect is still in its
Formative
formative
state.
stages. Yeah, you can tell. You can tell just by how he's working these themes constantly. Because if he figured them out, he'd lay it down. But he's always working them through his stories, working them out through his stories. And here you have that same thing. And he's what? Yeah, it's about this white guy who marries this Indian woman, and he's talking about what a tough customer she is. I mean, that was the main requirement you needed to survive up there, right? And you just had to be tough. You had to have endurance. You had to have stamina. You had to have grit. And that's how he describes all these Indians and these Indian wives, how these were great companions for these men, many of whom were not quite up to their level of hard-boiledness. They thought they were. But then they would take up the slack. The Indian women, they would pull them through. We'll see this in another one or two stories as we go along. It's basically a peon to Indian the Indian female.
A peon.
I think the British say peon.
Oh, because I think of peon as like a little guy, a peon.
Yeah. No.
We know what you mean. We know what you mean. But Kevin, this goes back. This goes back to your comment in a previous discussion that whereas London may be seen as racist and white supremacist and glorifying white colonialism, actually he's quite respectful and even
he's more than respectful. These are the people he ennobles in his writing.
And
these are the
calls the story Siwash. He just calls.
Yeah, these are the people he holds up as human examples for the rest of us. There's no question about it, because his bottom line is not civilization. His bottom line is you're in the middle of the great, white silence. You civilized.
How are you going to behave in that situation? How are you going to act? Are you going to act nobly or ignobly?
Are you going to come through? A and B. Even if you don't, will you take it like a man? Or in his view, will you take it like an Indian woman?
There you go.
Because they are coming to be the standard by which we measure heroism. I'm serious, because we can continue on here.
Okay, next story. The man with the gash.
I didn't like that at all. I thought that was just sort of kookiness, and I didn't understand how he put gold dust in his rifle as opposed to gunpowder, and why were they using gunpowder? I thought they just had cartridges. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to get into it. If you want to talk about it and tell me why I should like it, then go ahead.
Okay. Again, I don't remember too much detail on some of these stories.
Oh yes. I'm sorry. This guy's a miser. And he's got like a little roadhouse along the trail.
Yes.
And he just completely gyps guys because they're helpless. What are they going to do? For a place to stay. And he's miserly. He likes weighing his gold dust every day. But every night he has this like dream of a man with a gash who comes and steals it or something. Then finally,
man with a gash right there.
Yeah, and then finally, the man with the gash comes by. It's like, okay, come on. Okay, fine. It's Poe-esque, is what I'm saying. I think he liked and admired Poe, by the way. But it's not for me when London. It's not for me when London does it. It's not for me. It's like I want the the hard boiled survival London. I don't want this kooky stuff with the man with the gash and then the guy wakes up in the middle of the night and puts gold dust in his rifle and it backfires and kills him. I don't buy that.
Okay. So next story is called Jam the Unrepentant.
That was kind of fun. Not a serious story, I don't think. It's comparably very short. It's about 5 pages.
Right.
And it's just about a guy who kills someone and then they want to hang him, and then it turns out that the guy they thought he killed hadn't been killed, and then the guy who they thought had been killed now he says, "Stand aside, boys. I'm going to fight this guy on my own." It's like it's kind of like an anecdote.
I wrote at the end of it an odd little bagatelle.
Yes, thank you for the summary. That's it. Yeah.
But let me bring up another aspect of London here. Now, under the title of the story, Jan the Unrepentant, we have a little epigram that says, quoting someone else, "For there's never a law of God or man runs north of 53, north of the 53rd parallel." There's no law of God and man there at the 53. And this reminds me of something interesting. I'd like to take a little brief here to explore a theme I've found. In one of the London stories I've read over the past couple of weeks, just recently, one of the later stories, I believe London, if I'm not mistaken, he compares Alaska to a giant insane asylum. All the outcasts and refuse, the wretched refuse on the teeming shore, instead of going to Ellis Island, now they're going to Alaska, and Alaska becomes one big insane asylum. And I was just thinking also, a lot of these guys are French guys, like the Black Leclerc we mentioned, and these voyageurs going along, trying to get otter pelts and whatnot. It reminds me of the French Foreign Legion. All the outcasts and people who are on the lam, running from the law, they often would go to the French Foreign Legion. What's that famous story with the three guys? Beaugest is a famous. Beaugest, I love that story. Kind of a French Foreign Legion story where in the European tradition, people who were outcast could often go there to redeem themselves or find a new life. And so this movement toward Alaska of a lot of Americans who are somehow either disillusioned, running from the law, or outside the norms of society, it kind of it's like an American French Foreign Legion operation, this Alaska Klondike thing.
Yeah, well, that's a very astute
parallel there.
Yeah, that's a very astute observation, because in 1890, Frederick Jackson Turner declared the closure of the American frontier. You've heard that, right? He was a famous.
Yeah, well, I'm not too familiar, but yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, in 1890, he said the American frontier has officially been closed. I declare it closed because westward expansion had essentially stopped. Didn't have that outlet for the scum of the earth anymore. It had been settled in large parts. Well, look, when does the Alaskan gold rush come along? 1896. The scum of the earth is looking for a place to go. The frontier has closed. They have no other place to go, unless they wanted to go to Hawaii, I suppose. But maybe the Hawaiian plantation owners wouldn't have them. And they go up to Alaska to try their luck. So that makes sense, your little analysis with Frederick Jackson Turner and the closure of the frontier. Let's not forget the 49th state in the Union. Not at that point, but it would be. And that's a big hunk of American territory up there. Although they're going back and forth between Alaska and Canada. The division between the two countries is right where the Klondike is. So they're going back and forth across the border.
All right, Kev, good little interlude. Now we've got about 4 or 5 more stories to do in 15 minutes here.
Yeah.
The grit of women.
Grit of women. My favorite story in the anthology. Because it's my favorite character, this Indian woman. I mean, Jack London is becoming this great feminist.
A proto-feminist, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, truly, this is not even a joke on my part. It truly is. I counted them up, and as we ascertained in the first selection, 5 of the 9 stories, women were major players in it, if not the outright heroes. And in 6 of 11, we have women as main characters here.
There you go.
And this, for me, this one woman in the grit of women. And this is one title which is very apropos. Thank you. I mean, it hits the nail on the head. Okay, finally, Mr. she is amazing. And she is married to Sitka Charlie, whom I mentioned a while back. I think I called him Charlie Sitka. Sorry about that, Sitka Charlie. But yeah, he's
Either
Sitka
way.
Charlie. He's a full-blood Indian, I think. And he's married to an Indian woman. And they relate an adventure. He relates an adventure. This is, in retrospect, kind of Conradian, telling the tale around the late night fire. And he's talking about, the contrast between Yankee women. I guess there's a white woman here in the beginning or something, and they talk about the contrast. Well, anyway, that's another story. But anyway, they're talking about the contrast between white women and Indian women. And then he tells a story of his wife. And she's just the toughest, most self-sacrificing character in all of American literature.
Wow, you're going out on a limb there, my friend.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, just read it, and he talks about how she puts this white man, Axel Gunderson, this big hulking white. I don't know. Is he Scandinavian?
I think he's a Swede.
Maybe he's a Swede, directly from Sweden. Okay.
Yeah.
And she just hikes him off his feet. Right. He can't keep up. Because they're making some long passage. Oh, they're trying to Dawson City or 40 Mile. I get those two mixed up. There's a famine afoot. So Sitka Charlie is tasked with going out to notify people and let them ship food in. And this Axel Gunderson goes with him along with his wife. And this Axel Gunderson, he dies on the trail. He just can't keep it. He can't keep up. He's weeping. You feel sorry for the guy, actually. And but this woman is tough as nails. And there are some passages here, and they're starving. They're starving too. So you got this big guy. It's big guys. It's harder for them than little guys to move through, deep snow. Can you imagine with the snow?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
You have to lift your foot straight up and then
you got to take it straight up and then put it straight down. And at a certain point, he just went off on his own.
And a lot of times you might be over a frozen lake and fall into a frozen lake and die.
Right. And of course he needs like twice or three times as much food. He's a massive dude.
Yeah.
So you feel sorry for him, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, that's typical. Glidden shows how these white guys, they just bite off more than they can chew.
Right.
And she puts him to shame, and actually, then he eventually does she shoot him? Does she shoot him? I think or something to put him out of his misery, or does she just leave him?
I don't remember.
Again, I think I might be mixing up my stories, but
I'm looking.
Yeah.
Here. Yeah. It's okay. We don't want to give a spoiler on it. We're hopefully going to get people to read these themselves.
Okay, good. Yeah, but the thing is, there are some. I just got to read this part. Okay. This is just poetic stuff. I think he does some of the poetic stuff. And this is Sitka Charlie talking. Life is a strange thing. Much have I thought on it and pondered long. Yet daily the strangeness of it grows not less but more. Why this longing for life? It is a game which no man wins. To live is to toil hard and to suffer sore till old age creeps heavily upon us and we throw down our hands on the cold ashes of dead fires. It is hard to live. In pain the babe sucks his first breath. In pain the old man gasps his last. And all his days are full of trouble and sorrow. Yet he goes down to the open arms of death, stumbling, falling, with head turned backward, fighting to the last. And death is kind. It is only life, and the things of life that hurt. Yet we love life, we hate death. It is very strange. And this was exactly what he was writing at the end of Martin Eden. It's the same sentiment. Life, only life hurts you. Death is a welcome release.
In fact, that's a motif in a lot of his stories.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I will say this bit back to his so-called suicide or whatever when he was dying. They talk about how that whole time, like not the whole time, but he had a smile on his face, Jack, in his semi-conscious state. They said he had a smile on his face.
That's why you call it a so-called suicide, because you don't see it as suicidal at all.
I don't know. I mean, maybe he was just glad he was dying. It was finally over. But they said he had a little smile on his face. Okay, anyway.
Okay, Kev. Next, we only have about 10 more minutes for the rest of this. But
Just let me finish this.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. The reason, and you think, okay, good. She's tough. She's bred to this sort of hardship. Fine, right? But no. What happens at the end is when she finally dies. Axel Gunderson dies. However he dies. And Sitka Charlie is still, he's on the verge of death, but he's still alive. Their rations are running low. And she's going to die, right? And she gives this little speech, which is something like dialogue from a Hollywood film, and you can just imagine the soundtrack with Steiner or Waxman or Korngold.
Okay.
Very brief. This is the end of the trail for Pasuk. Her name is Pasuk. She's speaking about herself. This is the end of the trail for Pasuk, but your trail, Charlie, leads on and on over the great Chilkoot, down to Haines Mission and the sea. And it leads on and on by the light of many suns, over unknown lands and strange waters, and it is full of years and honors and great glories. It leads you to the lodges of many women and good women, but it will never lead you to a greater love than the love of Pasuk. It's almost corny if it didn't almost also bring you to tears after having read the whole story.
Absolutely.
Because that's corny, and this is a corny moment. And the punchline is that then she takes from her breast that she'd been hiding the food that she had not been eating. She had saved half of it for Charlie, who could then survive and continue on to get help for this famished city. And the other punchline is they had met someone, an Indian, along the way, and they had finally sent him on his way. They didn't give him any food or anything. And she later told him, that was my brother. So she lets her brother die. She lets herself die in order that Charlie can live.
That's loyalty.
I love that story. Yeah, call me a sentimentalist, but I think it hit me. So on to the next one.
Okay, and you said that Grit of Women. Did you say that was your favorite story in the collection?
That's my favorite one because she's my favorite character. She's just so beautifully loyal and self-sacrificing and gritty. Yes.
Okay, great. So to use the words he used in the title, the Grit of Women. Okay, the next story is Where the Trail Forks.
Yeah, a woman, an Indian is rescued. I didn't much care for it. I thought it was impossible to have happened.
Okay.
I mean, basically, I'll do this in 1 minute. Again, but it's a relationship between a white man and an Indian woman. And she comes into his camp and she says, they're going to sacrifice me. I guess they were doing human sacrifices still up there.
For some reason, I forget what. Yeah.
Well, because of the famine, and they want to appease the
gods of the Indian.
Right, appease the great great Thunderbird of the sky or whatever. And he says, hey, that's no good. And he tells his white buddies, he's got 3 buddies there, prospector. He says, hey, let's go save her. And they go, no, it's not our business. You crazy? You're going to get slaughtered. Anyway, there's some fantastic stuff that goes on. Fantastic in the sense of it's hard to believe. Like he crawls under a tent and he sticks his head in there between her and the rest of the lodge, and he whispers to her. Like he crawls into the snow. The tent's pitched on the snow. He crawls into the snow and like sticks his head up next to her, and she kind of covers it up. And then he fights it. They flee, and then they have a little fight, and then they get away, and then the Indians come back and they slaughter those three prospectors who didn't want to help her. It's kind of a morality tale. It's like Yeah, it's like London saying, "Hey, would you rather die a heroic death, or survive on your knees, a coward, or even would you rather live a heroic death and die on your knees, a coward?" Yeah.
And he's showing the kind of the Western civilization, the Judeo-Christian values in a very positive sense. That
Yeah,
guy, we should be against human sacrifice no matter what. And one guy's willing to lay himself on the line to prevent it. The ones who don't end up getting killed anyway. So you might as well act
right.
heroically and chivalrously. I like
Yeah.
that. I like that message there.
I like the
Okay.
message. I thought again, the way that the fellow who goes into the camp to rescue her, the way he does it, I thought it was just improbable.
That is true.
Some of London's stuff is just he's really bought into the Nietzschean Superman. I mean, he really has. Like, this guy can do anything. And at a certain point, you go, no.
Okay, I hear you on that. Now, we got a few more to wrap up here. A daughter of the Aurora.
Yeah, I didn't care for it much. We have a French Canadian woman, I suppose, and two white men are rivals for her affections, and they're trying to win a claim that has been abandoned by someone, and it's a big strike up in that certain area, and they're trying to win a claim, and they both got to post the claim, and then at midnight, 2 months have elapsed since the disappearance of this guy who had actually originally posted the claim. That they know where he is. After 2 months elapses, then you can stake it for yourself, and then a bunch of guys go up there and try and do that. And her two rivals, they got the best teams of dogs and everything, and they got like a 100-mile run down to the registry office. See who gets there first. It's like a race, and may the best man win. And she has like promised to both of them that the man who wins that and gets the claim, she will marry them. Well, she kind of pulls some Odyssean, cunning, and it's kind of kooky. I won't even go into it, but
yeah.
I didn't buy it. I didn't even. It wasn't even that humorous. I mean, London does not do humor that well. Let's just say that he does irony great, but humor is not his forte.
Okay, I did notice on a couple stories such as that one, he's kind of mimicking Mark Twain with his, the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County type story is dropped in one, but he's not really Twain.
He can't. Twain's funny. London is almost never funny.
And you said he's also not Edgar Allan Poe. At certain times he's trying to mimic Poe, certain times Twain, but you feel that's not his true voice.
No. He's got to stick. He's got to stick with what he knows best, and that means, man in the midst of unforgiving nature.
That is his forte. Now, to wrap it up, two more real quick. We have At the Rainbow's End. Anything to say about that?
I don't even know if I can recall it. Can you? Doesn't say much. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it. Oh yes, I remember. That's about how a bunch of guys die in this big glacial sort of jam up of ice that comes down the river, and they're on this little island in it, and it just overtakes them. It's like a horror story in a natural setting. Yeah.
Okay. Did you find it effective or not so?
No, I got a little confused at a certain point. Sometimes his descriptions get a little bit too involved for me. Usually he doesn't. I mean, but sometimes it does, and I just don't know where I am. I was lost in that story, and so the ending wasn't even a big payoff for me because I didn't know quite where I was.
Yeah, and without your wonderful little prompts, I'm also not sure.
Yeah,
I don't quite remember it as much.
That's one we can very fairly and easily neglect.
Okay, we'll just go over that one to the next one. The scorn of women is how he concludes it. Is it a good conclusion? The scorn of women.
No, I scorn this story. I didn't like it at all. There are like 5 women in it. I should like it. I love his women's stories. But maybe because there were no Indian women. Huh.
There you go.
Yeah. It was just about a bunch of white women who are vying for the affections of this, rich prospector. And you can tell at certain points where London is writing, for length. This is his longest story, and he's getting paid by the word. I mean, originally
okay.
probably came out originally in a magazine. He's getting paid for words, so there's a lot of wordiness, which is not him, So it's not only that I don't like wordiness, generally speaking, but it's like, Jack, you're not doing Jack here, and
you're not doing Jack.
He's getting too involved in the various relationships between the women and stuff. Okay, when he's got one or two women, that's fine, but when he's handling like 5 or something, he starts.
And he even has the guy
who can't quite keep those balls in the air.
And he even describes the guy who these women are competing for as kind of a Klondike Don Juan. Even he mentions that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think he did the job here. Just to sum up, I would say I marked them. Yeah, there are. I would say about a good half of the stories I liked, but they weren't the solid quality of each of those stories. Pretty much in the Son of the Wolf.
All right, Kev, so thank you for the summary of these 11 stories. Shall we do Children of the Frost next week?
Oh, why not?
This is a lot of fun. I don't know if it's fun for the viewer, but it's fun for us. So let's give it a...
It's probably not for the viewer, but for the sake of completion, I suppose we should. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many?
I think there's 10 of them. Yeah, he's got 10 of them. Let's give it a try, Kev. It's a lot of fun. I mean, basically, no one else is doing this on YouTube. So why don't we do it? A deep dive into London.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Children of the Frost. And I like his titles here. We have In the Forests of the North, The Law of Life, the Law of Life, right?
Right.
Nam Bok the Unveracious. All right. The Master of Mystery. Ooh, what could that be? The Sunlanders, The Sickness of Lone Chief. Oh, I read that already. That's very good. Quiche, The Son of Quiche. Sounds like some kind of schlock 60s sci-fi film or something.
There you go.
The Death of Lagoon, Li Wan the Fair, The League of the Old Men. But you can tell he's got all these Indian names in the titles. I mean, this is the great, again, just to say it, for those who are late to the game here, that London lavishes so much attention on not only women, but the native populace.
There you go.
Is quite a revelation. I didn't have that in mind. And he doesn't lavish attention on them in any kind of condescending or infantilizing way. He does a deep dive into their psyches as best he can. And the words he gives them to say, it smacks of veracity. Whether it is or not, I don't care, because it's fiction. It's what your imagination seizes on and tells you. This is how things are.
Okay, so we're going to be going through all 10 of those stories next week. So as Michael Savage says, be there or be nowhere. And we will see you next week. Thanks, Kevin, for the survey.
All right. Yeah, see you later. Bye-bye.